The grand lobby of Russo Global Logistics hummed with the muted symphony of a thriving empire, a cold, polished expanse of steel and glass that swallowed sound and dwarfed ambition. At its heart, behind a desk that felt both elegant and entirely too large for her, sat Nora Vance. 23 years old and already burdened by the silent weight of London rent and a younger sister's tuition. Nora performed her duties with a quiet competence that belied her inner world. She answered calls, directed formidable clients, and managed a complex calendar, all while secretly craving to be seen as more than just the girl who answered phones. Her only personal touch in the stark corporate environment was a small, inexpensive bouquet of daisies she'd bought from a street vendor that morning. Their cheerful yellow petals seemed almost defiant against the muted tones of the office, a tiny splash of warmth in her otherwise cool, efficient domain. She often caught her reflection in the gleaming surface of the desk, a young woman with earnest eyes and a perpetually worried frown, trying her best to project an image of effortless professionalism. The morning unfolded, with its usual parade of important faces, until a new one arrived. Mr. Thorne, a client from a rising tech firm, possessed an easy charm that instantly set him apart. He had kind eyes and a smile that reached them, a rare sight in the often impassive faces of the corporate world. Nora, instinctively courteous, found herself responding to his warmth. She offered him a genuine, unreserved smile as she confirmed his appointment and directed him to the private waiting area. For a fleeting moment, as his gaze met hers, she felt a pleasant, innocent connection, a momentary spark of humanity in the otherwise sterile efficiency of the day. It was a simple, harmless exchange, a brief respite from the endless stream of tasks. She watched him walk away, his figure receding into the polished chrome and glass, and a small, contented sigh escaped her lips. The lobby's vast glass doors reflected his departing form, and for an instant Nora saw her own gentle smile mirrored back, a soft, almost vulnerable expression. She was utterly unaware of the gaze fixed upon her from high above, from the impenetrable fortress of glass and steel that was Gabriel Russo's top-floor executive suite. He, the formidable CEO, a man whose control was as absolute as it was dangerous, whose name was whispered with a mix of awe and fear in London's financial circles, had seen it all. Gabriel Russo, rumored to have roots in shadows deeper than any corporate boardroom, was a master of observation, his empire built on anticipating every move, every threat. From his vantage point, the innocent exchange below had been anything but. His eyes, usually cool and analytical, had burned with an intensity that would have withered Nora had she been exposed to it. The easy smile, the pleasant connection she'd felt, they were transgressions in his tightly controlled world. As Mr. Thorne finally exited the building, disappearing into the persistent London drizzle, a sudden, sharp click reverberated from the executive floor, a sound that seemed disproportionately loud in the hushed expanse of the lobby. It was the distinct sound of a heavy door slamming shut, a definitive, unyielding punctuation mark to an unseen fury. Nora, still lost in the pleasant afterglow of the brief interaction, barely registered it, dismissing it as just another sound in the vast building. She had no way of knowing that her simple, kind smile had just irrevocably changed the course of her life. The pleasant warmth from Mr. Thorne's brief visit still lingered when the whispers started, a ripple of hushed urgency. Uncharacteristic for the composed lobby, spread quickly. Before Nora could fully process the shift, two stern-faced security guards appeared at the main entrance. They spoke quietly to Mr. Thorne, who had just returned for a forgotten item. His easy smile faltered, replaced by bewilderment, then indignation as he was firmly but politely escorted out. "Fired," someone hissed, "for unprofessional conduct." Nora's brow furrowed. What conduct? He had been nothing but kind. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Her confusion was short-lived. Moments later, her internal phone buzzed with an unfamiliar intensity. It was an urgent, unyielding summons from Gabriel Rousseau's private secretary. "Mr. Rousseau requires your presence immediately." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her hands, usually steady, trembled as she rose. She replayed her morning, searching for a misstep, a forgotten protocol, anything that could warrant a direct summons from the man who was more legend than boss. Dread coiled in her belly with every step towards the executive elevators. The journey upwards felt endless, the air in the private elevator thick with silent anticipation. When the doors finally parted, she was met by the hushed opulence of Gabriel's private floor, a world away from her bustling lobby. The secretary, a sentinel of efficiency, merely gestured towards a massive dark wooden door. Nora took a steadying breath, pushed it open and stepped inside. Gabriel Rousseau was an imposing silhouette behind his vast dark desk, the city sprawling like a miniature kingdom behind floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't look up immediately, allowing the silence to stretch, amplifying Nora's apprehension. When his gaze finally lifted, it was like being caught in the beam of a predator's eyes. They burned with an intensity that stripped away her composure, leaving her feeling small and utterly exposed. His presence alone was a physical force, pushing her back against the doorframe. His voice, when it came, was dangerously low, a controlled rumble that vibrated through the opulent office, commanding absolute attention. "Miss Vance." The single address was a dismissal of all pleasantries, a direct accusation. He didn't invite her to sit. "Mr. Thorne has been terminated, effective immediately for unprofessional conduct." The words were clipped, precise, leaving no room for argument. Nora swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "But, sir, I don't understand. He seemed perfectly professional." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, a subtle shift that made her instinctively flinch. "You are not required to understand, Miss Vance. You are required to accept my decisions." His gaze intensified, sweeping over her, a possessive scrutiny that made her skin prickle. "You are part of my domain," he stated, his voice dropping to an even deeper register. "And my domain is not a place for idle pleasantries with strangers." His words were a cold, undeniable claim, stripping away any illusion that her interactions were her own. He wasn't explaining, he was asserting. She belonged to him in some unspoken absolute way. It was terrifying, but beneath the fear, a strange, almost dizzying sense of inevitability settled over her. His power was so absolute, it felt like a force of nature, and she, a small boat caught in its current, could only yield. Her eyes drifted to the corner of his vast desk. There, carelessly discarded, lay a crumpled, shredded business card, its edges torn as if by a sudden, violent impulse. It was Mr. Thorne's, she realized with a jolt. A brutal symbol of Gabriel's instant, decisive action, a testament to what happened when his unspoken rules were broken. She felt a shiver of fear, then a profound, unsettling certainty. Dismissed with a curt nod, Nora retreated, her legs feeling strangely heavy. She made her way back to the lobby, her mind reeling. Her desk, her cheerful daisies, her quiet corner of the world seemed suddenly alien, tainted by the heavy atmosphere of Gabriel's anger. But as she approached, she stopped dead. Her desk was cleared, her flowers, her personal effects gone. In their place, resting on the polished surface, was a single sleek, black keycard. It wasn't a standard employee card, it was a special card, she knew, one that granted access only to Gabriel Rousseau's private executive elevator. Her old world, with its small comforts and predictable routines, had vanished. A new one, defined by his will, had just begun. The next morning Nora stood before her old desk, a ghost of her former self. It was utterly bare, stripped of her daisies, her planner, every small item that had marked it as hers. The stark emptiness was a physical manifestation of the abrupt end to her old life. In its place, on the polished surface, lay the sleek black keycard. Its cold metal felt heavy in her palm, a tangible link to the man who had so decisively reshaped her existence. With a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, Nora inserted the card into the slot beside the private executive elevator. The doors slid open with a soft, almost reverent whisper, revealing a plush, silent interior that felt miles away from the bustling lobby. She stepped inside, and as the doors closed, a sense of finality settled over her. This was it, her ascent to his world. The elevator delivered her to Gabriel's private floor, a realm of hushed opulence and unspoken power. A discreet woman in a perfectly tailored suit met her, offering a polite but distant smile before leading her to a luxurious antechamber. This was her new workspace, a gilded cage directly outside Gabriel's imposing office. It was beautiful, far grander than anything she had ever imagined for herself, yet the isolation was profound. Here, there were no other assistants, no casual chatter, just the soft hum of unseen machinery and the oppressive silence of absolute control. Gabriel himself appeared in the doorway of his office a few moments later, his presence filling the space, making the air crackle with his power. He didn't raise his voice, yet his words were commands, firm and unyielding. He laid out her new duties, the meticulous details of her schedule, her working hours that now stretched beyond the norm, and her movements, which were to be confined strictly to the executive floor unless otherwise directed. She was always to be within his line of sight, or at the very least, within earshot. There was no room for questions, no possibility of negotiation. His rules were absolute, and she was to obey. Then came the subtle, yet unmistakable introduction of her new shadow. A man, tall and silent, emerged from a discreet doorway Nora hadn't noticed. He was introduced as part of her personal security detail, a constant presence that would now accompany her everywhere, even during her commute home. Her world, once marked by small freedoms and independent choices, had shrunk to the boundaries he imposed. Nora, with her gentle nature and quiet aspirations, felt utterly overwhelmed. The opulent surroundings, the quiet efficiency of Gabriel's operation, the constant watchful gaze of her security, and above all, the sheer, undeniable power emanating from Gabriel himself were a stark contrast to her humble life. She was a delicate flower transplanted into a harsh, magnificent garden, struggling to find purchase. His world was not soft, it was honed from steel and ambition, and she felt like a fragile porcelain doll within it. Yet, as the initial shock began to recede, a strange, nascent sense of security began to bloom within her. The constant gnawing worry that had been a shadow in her old life, the relentless demands of rent, the burden of her younger sister's tuition, all of it had miraculously been removed. Gabriel hadn't just given her a job, he had lifted the crushing weight of her anxieties. His absolute authority, though intimidating, was also a formidable shield. She was under his protection now, enveloped by a power so vast, so unyielding, that it felt impenetrable. In this strange new reality, despite the fear, she felt a profound, if unsettling sense of safety. Nora's days now unfolded with a new, rigid rhythm. The grand antechamber became her world, its quiet luxury both a privilege and a gilded cage. Gabriel's expectations were relentless. Perfection wasn't just desired, it was demanded, down to the precise temperature of his coffee and the flawless organization of his documents. Punctuality was absolute, and discretion, a silent pact she understood without him ever needing to voice it, was paramount. His presence, even when unseen behind his office door, was a palpable force, a constant pressure in the air she breathed. She found herself anticipating his needs, her actions guided by an instinct she hadn't known she possessed. A quiet efficiency settled over her, born not just of professionalism, but of a deep, almost primal desire to meet his formidable standards. When she succeeded, when a task was completed to his unspoken satisfaction, a strange sense of accomplishment settled over her, a quiet hum of approval that resonated deep within. The executive benefits of her new role were indeed generous, swiftly erasing the financial anxieties that had once plagued her. Her sister's tuition was covered, her rent bills a distant memory. Gabriel had ensured her security in every sense, but it felt less like a benefit and more like another facet of his absolute control. He didn't ask if she needed help. He simply removed the need. It was a silent transaction, her financial freedom for her unwavering presence in his orbit. His watchful gaze was a constant, whether direct or implied. Nora quickly learned that nothing escaped his notice. She might be in her antechamber, typing a report, but she could feel the weight of his attention, an invisible tether connecting them. She began to notice subtle shifts in her routine, changes that were too deliberate to be coincidental. Her driver, one of the ever-present security detail, would take slightly different routes home, navigating through parts of London she hadn't frequented. Her schedule, once somewhat flexible, was now meticulously optimized, her breaks timed, her departures set, always under the watchful eyes of the men who shadowed her. It was a slow realization, creeping up on her like the London fog. She was no longer just an employee. She was an asset, carefully managed and protected. Her entire life, from her professional duties to her personal movements, was now orchestrated by Gabriel. She was completely reliant on him, a fact that would have once terrified her, but now, surprisingly, brought a strange sense of peace. This reliance, this absolute surrender to his authority, began to foster an unexpected comfort. Gabriel Rousseau was a formidable, unyielding force, a man whose power was absolute, a fact she saw reflected in every aspect of her new life. Yet, within his formidable sphere, she was safe. It was a safety unlike any she had ever known, a profound, all-encompassing protection that negated the petty worries and larger threats of the world outside. His demanding nature, once intimidating, began to morph in her perception. She started to see it not as mere control, but as an extension of his protective instinct. He was meticulous because he cared, because he left no room for error when her well-being was involved. She wasn't just an assistant, she was cherished, albeit in a fiercely possessive way. It was a primal, almost instinctive understanding that settled deep within her bones. When he commanded, when he set his stringent rules, she felt not diminished but secured, like a precious item locked away in an impregnable vault. Her will, once striving for independence, now found solace in aligning with his. The true weight of this protective cocoon became starkly clear one blustery London afternoon. A sudden torrential downpour erupted without warning as the workday ended, turning the city streets into a slick, grey maze. Nora's security detail moved to shield her as they exited the building, but before they could fully raise their umbrellas, Gabriel himself was there. He emerged from the revolving doors, a dark, imposing figure against the shimmering backdrop of rain and city lights. Without a word, he stepped directly beside her, his large hand extending to hold a massive black umbrella not over himself, but entirely over her. The expensive fabric formed a perfect, impenetrable dome, shielding her completely from the lashing rain and the biting wind. His broad shoulder brushed against hers, a fleeting but electric contact, and she felt the warmth of his powerful body against her side. For the first time, in that simple, intimate gesture, Nora felt the full force of his unwavering protection, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible, physical shield. The rain hammered harmlessly above them, but beneath the shelter of his umbrella, pressed close to his immense frame, she felt utterly safe, completely enveloped in his care. It was a rare, unspoken promise, a stark declaration in the heart of the storm. She was his, and he would keep her safe, no matter the elements, no matter the cost. Nora found that the gilded cage of her new life, for all its comforts and security, came with invisible bars. She tried to maintain contact with her old friends, the familiar faces from her previous existence, but it proved increasingly difficult. Her phone, now a sleek, top-of-the-line model provided by Gabriel's company, felt less like a personal device and more like a monitored extension of his empire. When she called Chloe, her former colleague from the front desk, the conversations felt strained, punctuated by Nora's subconscious self-censorship. She found herself editing her words, aware that every casual remark about her opulent new life or about Gabriel's formidable presence felt like a breach of an unspoken code. Chloe, for her part, seemed unusually interested, her questions about Gabriel's daily routine and Nora's new responsibilities subtly probing, a little too keen. "Is he really as intense as they say, Nora?" Chloe had asked, her voice a little too eager. Nora had simply demurred, a vague answer about his demanding nature. She didn't want to explain the visceral impact of his gaze, the way his voice could command an entire room to silence, or the strange, dizzying sense of security that now enveloped her. It was a world Chloe couldn't understand, a world Nora herself was still trying to navigate. The distance between them grew with each guarded conversation, Nora feeling increasingly isolated, yet strangely protected from the outside world. It was Gabriel himself who started to peel back the layers of the threat, though always subtly, never fully revealing the terrifying scope. He would speak in low, measured tones, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the gleaming city skyline of unseen enemies and complex threats. "The world outside these walls, Nora," he had said one evening as the city lights began to twinkle below them, "is not as orderly as it seems. There are forces at play, currents beneath the surface that seek to disrupt, to destroy." He didn't directly tell her she was in danger, but his words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. He spoke of leverage, of vulnerabilities, of the lengths rivals would go to wound a man like him. "Your position here," he would often conclude, turning his piercing gaze back to her, "is not merely a preference, it is a necessity for your survival." His voice, though calm, held an undeniable weight, a command that settled deep in her bones. She absorbed his warnings, the grim reality of a world she had never known, and with each chilling detail, her trust in his extreme measures deepened. The outside world, with its vague dangers, became a place she was increasingly grateful to be shielded from, safe within the formidable fortress of his authority. One afternoon, as Nora was meticulously organizing a stack of complex reports on his vast desk, Gabriel had been on a call, his back to her, speaking in a low, almost guttural tone into his secure line. She wasn't meant to listen, but her presence in his antechamber often meant she was privy to fragments of his intense business dealings. He ended the call abruptly, turning to retrieve a document from his internal safe. As he moved, his profile was momentarily caught in the soft light filtering through the executive windows. For a fleeting instant, before his usual mask of dangerous control could fully reassert itself, Nora caught an unguarded expression on his face. It was a flicker of something profound, not just the cold calculation she was accustomed to, but a deep, almost aching concern, a tenderness that seemed entirely out of place on his formidable features. His jaw, usually set in granite, seemed to soften for a fraction of a second, his eyes holding a haunted quality she hadn't seen before. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by his habitual intensity as he turned fully to her, his gaze once again sharp and impenetrable. But the image was etched in Nora's mind, a tiny crack in the impenetrable facade of the man who controlled her world. It made her wonder, with a dizzying intensity, if his possessiveness, his absolute authority, stemmed not just from a desire to own, but from something far deeper, something akin to a desperate need to protect. Later that evening, long after most of the building had emptied, Nora was still at her desk, finishing up a last-minute request. Gabriel was in his office, the door ajar on another secure call. The low murmur of his voice was a familiar backdrop, a constant presence. But then a few distinct words cut through the quiet, words that sent a cold shiver racing down Nora's spine, dispelling any lingering warmth from her earlier thoughts. The syndicate. They're getting bolder. His voice was sharper now, edged with steel. They believe she's leverage, exposure, a soft spot. There was a pause, a tense silence, then Gabriel's voice colder than she had ever heard it. No, she is not a bargaining chip. They will learn that. The words hung in the air, invisible but palpable, painting a chilling picture of an unseen world of threats and danger. Nora froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Syndicate, leverage, exposure. The words were like ice shards, piercing through her carefully constructed sense of safety. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. The fear was real now, concrete, terrifying. It wasn't just his jealousy or his control. It was a dark, dangerous reality, and she, Nora Vance, was caught in its crosshairs. The ominous fragments of Gabriel's phone call had shattered Nora's fragile sense of security, revealing a chilling reality she had only vaguely glimpsed. Now, the abstract danger began to solidify, pressing in on her from the edges of her newly structured life. Her security detail, once a silent, almost invisible presence, became conspicuously active. One afternoon, as her driver navigated the rain-slicked streets of Kensington, Nora noticed a nondescript black sedan lingering a little too long behind them at a red light, its tinted windows offering no glimpse of those inside. Her security guard, seated in the passenger seat, subtly adjusted his mirror, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The sedan vanished quickly, but the cold prickle of unease remained. Later that week, a cryptic, anonymous message briefly flashed across her company-issued tablet, a veiled threat, a string of garbled code that hinted at surveillance, then vanished, deleted before she could fully comprehend its meaning. Her security detail, always vigilant, had intercepted and purged it within seconds, but the incident left her shaken, her breath catching in her throat. Each incident, though minor, chipped away at her composure, replacing it with a primal fear she had never known. The world outside the towering walls of Gabriel's empire was indeed a dangerous place, and she, Nora Vance, was unmistakably caught in its crosshairs. Gabriel's response was immediate and absolute, a tightening of the fortress around her that left no room for doubt or argument. He summoned her to his office, his face grim, his eyes holding a dangerous intensity that made her heart pound. He didn't waste words. "They are testing the boundaries, Nora," he stated, his voice a low, controlled rumble that resonated with unyielding power. "They perceive you as my soft spot, a weakness they can exploit. They believe you are leverage." He spoke broadly, careful not to overwhelm her with explicit details, but the message was clear. His enemies were actively attempting to use her against him. He outlined the new measures with chilling precision. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a fortified haven, equipped with advanced security systems that would make it almost impenetrable. Her round-the-clock security team was expanded, their presence a constant, unwavering shield. Every aspect of her life was now under an even tighter, more absolute control, all for her protection. He left no room for questions, no opportunity for dissent. His will was her safety, and she felt the overwhelming, powerful force of his decision settling over her like an unbreakable cage. Then came the confirmation that pulled all the disparate threads together, a revelation that validated every seemingly jealous action, every possessive command, every instance of his absolute control. Gabriel leaned forward, his gaze piercing, holding hers captive. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "was a plant, a scout, sent by the rival syndicate to assess your accessibility, to gauge my reaction." The words hit Nora with the force of a physical blow. Mr. Thorne, the charming client whose smile had offered a brief, innocent connection, had been a wolf in sheep's clothing, a pawn in a dangerous game she hadn't even known existed. The realization was both devastating and profoundly clarifying. His firing, his dismissal, had not been an act of irrational jealousy. It had been a warning, a declaration of ownership, a desperate attempt to protect her from a threat she hadn't been able to see. Her perception of Gabriel shifted irrevocably. The controlling, possessive CEO, whose demands had sometimes felt suffocating, transformed in her mind into something far more profound, a true protector. His earlier fury, the almost violent claim he had made over her, was no longer a sign of obsession, but a testament to his foresight, his vigilance, his unwavering dedication to her safety. A profound, almost dizzying sense of trust solidified within her. He had seen the danger, and he had acted ruthlessly and without hesitation to shield her. Late that night, long after the city had settled into its restless sleep, Nora stood by the reinforced windows of her apartment. Below, the rain-slicked London streets gleamed with the reflection of countless city lights, a beautiful, dangerous tapestry. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the chilling reality of the external world, a place teeming with unseen threats and ruthless enemies. But as she gazed out, she also felt the impenetrable shield Gabriel had built around her. She was a precious object, meticulously guarded, held safe within his formidable domain. His possessiveness, once a source of fear, now felt like the most profound form of care, an unyielding, absolute protection that promised she would be safe, always by his side. It was a terrifying reality, but within it, she felt an undeniable, profound sense of peace. The abstract fear that had begun to coil around Nora tightened into an unyielding grip. Gabriel's warnings had not been idle threats. The subtle incidents, the veiled messages, were concrete proof of the dangers lurking just beyond his formidable shield. In response, Gabriel became even more stringent, his control clamping down on every aspect of her life with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Her movements, once merely monitored, were now severely restricted. She no longer had the freedom to step out for a quick lunch or even to visit the staff break room on lower floors. Her world was the executive floor, her antechamber, and the carefully vetted route between her apartment and the office. All personal calls were now routed through a secure line, and any contact with anyone outside Gabriel's immediate trusted circle required his explicit approval. He didn't ask, he informed. His voice, steady and unyielding, left no room for argument, no space for her gentle protests. "Your safety, Nora," he had stated, his gaze unwavering, "is paramount. There is no alternative." It was an absolute command, delivered with a force that made her instinctively yield. The sheer weight of undeniable external danger had finally broken through her last vestiges of independent will. She had seen the evidence, felt the chill of the unseen threats. Now, faced with the stark reality, Nora fully accepted his authority. It was no longer a matter of being controlled, but of being protected. She yielded completely, a deep, irreversible surrender settling over her. His extreme measures, once a source of quiet resentment, were now clearly born of necessity, of a deep, unyielding protection. Her trust in his judgment, once a tentative bud, solidified into an unshakable conviction. He knew best. He was the fortress, and she was safe within his walls. Amidst this rigid control, however, Nora began to notice small, almost imperceptible acts of care, unexpected gestures that spoke volumes. She would find her favorite herbal tea, perfectly brewed and still steaming, placed silently on her desk after a particularly long day. Gabriel, who rarely ate in the office, would sometimes send up a small, exquisitely prepared meal for her, always ensuring it was exactly what she preferred. Even when she hadn't voiced a preference, she realized he was ensuring she was well-fed, rested, shielded from even the mundane discomforts. These were not overt expressions of tenderness, but they were profound in their unspoken message. He didn't just protect her from external threats, he nurtured her, cared for her well-being, in his own demanding, absolute way. It was a possessive care, but it was care nonetheless, and Nora found herself leaning into it, finding comfort in the unwavering strength of his regard. One afternoon, a delivery arrived at the executive floor. It was a small, unassuming package addressed to Nora. Her security detail meticulously scanned it before bringing it to her. Inside, nestled among tissue paper, was a bouquet of flowers. Nora's breath hitched. They were daisies, small and cheerful, identical to the cheap bouquet she used to buy for her old front desk, the one that had been removed when her life changed. A wave of nostalgia, sweet and sharp, washed over her, but beneath the flowers, a folded note lay hidden. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. The words were crudely scrawled, anonymous, but chillingly specific. "Your sister smiles so beautifully, just like you." A cold dread washed over Nora, freezing her blood. The warmth from the daisies vanished, replaced by an icy terror. They knew about her sister. They had found her. Gabriel, who had been standing silently in his office doorway watching her, moved with sudden predatory swiftness. He crossed the antechamber in 2 long strides, his immense presence eclipsing her. His hand, large and powerful, closed over hers, plucking the note from her numb fingers. His eyes, when they scanned the words, darkened to a dangerous, almost black intensity. The muscles in his jaw flexed, a terrifying tension pulling at his face. He crumpled the note into a tight ball, crushing it in his fist with a sound like dry bone breaking. His face was a mask of cold fury, a silent, terrifying promise of retribution. The chilling words of the anonymous note and Gabriel's silent, furious reaction had solidified the abstract fear into a cold, hard knot in Nora's stomach. They knew about her sister. They had found her. The immediate danger had never felt so real, so personal. As Gabriel crushed the note, his face a mask of terrifying resolve, Nora felt a profound, almost primal instinct to lean into his immense strength, to let him be the wall between her and the encroaching darkness. Later, as the intensity of the moment receded, leaving a lingering tremor in her hands, Nora found herself replaying the past months, sifting through memories with a newfound, terrifying clarity. It wasn't just the dramatic shift after Mr. Thorne, the sudden promotion and the ever-present security. It went further back, subtle shifts she had dismissed as coincidence, or the demands of a new, high-stakes job. She remembered the odd changes in her commute, how her driver, without explanation, had started taking routes that were slightly longer, yet always smoother, less congested, leading her through brightly lit, affluent areas instead of the usual shortcuts down grimy London alleyways. She remembered her shifts being subtly altered, a casual instruction from her old manager about a new, optimal schedule that always kept her out of the office during certain hours, or had her leaving earlier on specific days, avoiding the late-night rush hour entirely. Even her choice of a new apartment, after Gabriel had generously handled her housing, had been subtly steered towards a secure, modern building in a quiet, almost secluded part of the city, far from her old, vulnerable neighborhood. It clicked into place with a sickening lurch. It wasn't just since Mr. Thorne. Gabriel had been quietly rerouting her life, altering her shifts, influencing her personal choices for months, long before she even knew danger existed. He had been protecting her, a silent, unseen guardian, from a threat she hadn't even realized was looming. His jealousy, his furious outburst over a simple smile, had been a masterful deception, a necessary public mask for an intense, proactive protection that had already been in motion. This revelation created a profound, seismic shift within Nora. His possessiveness, once a source of confusion and even resentment, now transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't about control for control's sake, it was about an overwhelming, absolute need to keep her safe. The anger she had felt, the quiet frustration with his stringent rules, melted away, replaced by a rush of overwhelming gratitude and a deep, irreversible dependence. She wasn't just yielding to his authority, she was actively seeking it, finding solace in its unwavering strength. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a demanding boss, but a formidable, unyielding protector who had been fighting her battles long before she even knew war had been declared. Gabriel, sensing her internal shift, didn't belabor the point. Instead, he brought the external threat into sharper focus. He called up news reports on his massive monitor, grim headlines detailing increasing, violent skirmishes in London's underworld, attributed to rival syndicates. He showed her images, cold and stark, of the men who led these factions, faces etched with ruthlessness, eyes devoid of mercy. "These are not men who negotiate, Nora," he stated, his voice low and devoid of inflection, yet heavy with warning. "They understand only power, and they will stop at nothing to gain an advantage." The scale of the threat was immense, terrifying, and it dwarfed her completely, making her feel utterly insignificant outside the sphere of his protection. As she absorbed the chilling reality, a new wave of fear washed over her, but it was quickly tempered by the profound sense of safety that now enveloped her when she was near him. He was her shield, her fortress, her absolute defense against a world too dangerous for her to navigate alone. Later that day, as Nora prepared to leave, she caught a glimpse of something that sent another shiver down her spine. Chloe, her friend from the front desk, stood by the reception area, her head bent in an unusually intense, hushed conversation with a man Nora didn't recognize. He was tall, powerfully built, and dressed in a dark, expensive suit. Clearly not a typical employee. He looked like one of Gabriel's higher-level security personnel, yet Nora had never seen him on the executive floor, nor had he been part of her personal detail. As Nora's gaze landed on them, Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide, and the man quickly turned, disappearing into a service corridor with a practiced swiftness. A seed of suspicion, cold and sharp, was firmly planted in Nora's heart. The seed of suspicion, planted by Chloe's hushed conversation, had barely had time to take root before Nora found herself summoned once more to Gabriel's private office. The summons was delivered with a hushed urgency that set her teeth on edge. Her heart, already a nervous flutter, began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she walked the familiar, opulent corridor to his door. She pushed it open, stepping into the vast space, and found Gabriel already seated behind his desk, a formidable silhouette against the backdrop of the London skyline. His face was impassive, his eyes unreadable, but the air in the room felt thick with a silent, oppressive intensity that made Nora's breath catch. He gestured, not to the chair she sometimes used, but to the large monitor embedded in the wall opposite his desk. It sprang to life, displaying a series of images, lines of text, and complex graphs that made little sense to Nora at first. Then a familiar face appeared on the screen, caught in a grainy surveillance photo. Chloe. Nora's stomach dropped. The image shifted, showing Chloe's texts, then encrypted messages. Her name highlighted next to dates and times that stretched back months, long before Nora's promotion. The words were terse, coded, but the meaning became horribly clear as Gabriel's finger tapped a specific line on the screen. "She's taking the bait. Boss is obsessed." Another tap. "Russo's moved her. New floor. Security detail activated." Then a final, damning message. She smiled at Thorne. Russo fired him on the spot. "He's territorial. A clear weakness." Nora stared at the screen, her own reflection pale and distorted in the glow, superimposed over the image of her friend's betrayal. It was Chloe's face, Chloe's words, a cold, hard web of undeniable evidence. Every casual question, every sympathetic comment, every seemingly innocent inquiry about Nora's new life had been a meticulously gathered piece of information, fed directly to the very syndicate that sought to use Nora against Gabriel. Her friend, the person she had confided in, however briefly, was the very person who had been putting her and her sister in harm's way. A wave of nausea washed over Nora, followed by a searing pain in her chest. Heartbreak, sharp and sudden, mingled with a profound sense of violation. It felt like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and reeling. The world tilted on its axis, the last vestiges of her old life crumbling into dust. Gabriel watched her, his gaze unwavering, allowing her to absorb the full weight of the betrayal. He didn't offer comfort, didn't soften the blow. His anger was a chillingly silent force, a suffocating pressure in the room that spoke of a fury far too immense for mere words. His jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the storm raging within him. "Chloe Vance," he finally stated, his voice clipped, each word a shard of ice, "has been dealt with." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The implication hung heavy in the air, immediate, absolute and permanent. She was gone, removed from the picture, erased as efficiently as the digital messages on the screen. The sheer, terrifying extent of his power, his ability to manipulate and control, to eliminate threats with such ruthless precision, was overwhelming. Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, not for Chloe, but for the shattering of her own innocence, for the cruel reality of a world where even friendship could be a weapon. The devastation was profound, leaving her feeling utterly exposed and vulnerable. But beneath the raw pain of betrayal, a new emotion began to surface, displacing the grief. It was an overwhelming sense of awe, a dizzying recognition of the sheer scale of Gabriel's vigilance, the intricate, formidable web of protection he had woven around her. He had seen it all, known it all, long before she had even suspected. His control, once a source of quiet frustration, now felt like the only anchor in a world turned upside down. Chloe had betrayed her. The outside world was a nest of vipers, but Gabriel had been her shield. He had gathered the evidence, exposed the treachery, and dealt with the threat. She was safe only with him, only within the impenetrable sphere of his absolute authority. A profound, irreversible devotion solidified within Nora's heart. She looked at Gabriel, his imposing figure a dark, unyielding silhouette against the digital display of betrayal, and felt a quiet, absolute surrender. He was her protector, her fortress, the only truth she could cling to. Her will, once fractured by doubt, now aligned completely with his. She was his, utterly and irrevocably, and in that terrifying, absolute certainty, she finally felt truly safe. The revelation of Chloe's betrayal and Gabriel's swift, ruthless response had ripped away the last veil from Nora's eyes. She now saw the world and her place within it with a terrifying clarity. The rival syndicate, no longer just a shadowy threat, became a tangible, malevolent force, and her connection to Gabriel was the very reason for their escalating aggression. They were fully aware that Gabriel knew about their schemes, and in a desperate, furious counterattack, they struck back. The once hushed executive floor now thrummed with a frenetic, controlled energy. Nora felt the shift in the very air. News filtered up, though never directly to her, of audacious attacks on Gabriel's sprawling empire. Logistics hubs, vital arteries of his global network, suffered mysterious sabotages that crippled operations for hours. Attempts to breach his financial networks were detected, sophisticated digital assaults thwarted by his unseen army of cybersecurity experts. Even physical incursions, small but violent, were reported at less protected facilities, quickly contained, but leaving a trail of shattered glass and grim-faced security. They weren't trying to wound him financially. They were trying to draw him out, to create an opening, to get to her. She was the prize, the leverage they sought, and Gabriel was the formidable wall they were trying to tear down. Gabriel Russo became a general at war. Nora watched him, mesmerized and terrified, as he moved through his vast office, a whirlwind of controlled power. His calls were endless, his commands sharp and precise, directed to an army of unseen operatives across the globe. He was relentless, tireless, his focus absolute, his mind a steel trap anticipating every move, every counter-move. His face was set, grim, etched with an intensity that made him seem even larger, even more formidable than usual. He was a force of nature, protecting not just his empire, but her. He was fighting for her, and the sheer scale of his power, unleashed in her defense, was a terrifying, awe-inspiring thing. Nora, in this storm of war, found her role shifting. She became his silent, unwavering anchor. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath her skin, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of purpose. She anticipated his needs with an almost instinctive understanding. His office, usually a pristine bastion of order, became a war room, scattered with maps, data projections, and secure communication devices. Nora moved through it with quiet efficiency, ensuring every document was exactly where he needed it. Every screen displayed the correct information. She brought him his meals, unobtrusively placed on his desk, knowing he wouldn't ask, but would need the sustenance. She brewed his specific, strong coffee, ensuring it was always hot and ready. Her quiet presence, her unwavering faith, became a small human respite in his storm of war. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't question his decisions, didn't argue. She simply obeyed, her every action a testament to her absolute trust. When he glanced at her, his eyes, though still sharp with the demands of battle, held a flicker of something that steadied her. He was fighting for her, protecting her, and in her complete submission to his will, she found an unexpected, profound sense of safety. One afternoon, the relentless pace seemed to reach a crescendo. Gabriel was hunched over multiple monitors, his eyes scanning complex data streams, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. He hadn't moved from his position for hours, his focus absolute. Nora watched him from her antechamber, sensing the immense burden he carried. Silently, she brewed a fresh pot of his preferred tea, a rich, dark blend he favored when pushing through the night. She poured it into his heavy ceramic mug, adding a slice of lemon exactly as he liked it. Then she walked to his desk, her steps soft, almost imperceptible. Without a word, she placed the steaming cup by his hand, careful not to disturb his intense concentration. His fingers, powerful and precise, grazed the mug, but his eyes remained fixed on the screens, a myriad of numbers and graphs scrolling endlessly. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her with words, but as his hand wrapped around the warm mug, Nora felt a profound, unspoken connection. It was a small, yet deeply significant gesture of comfort and support, offered and accepted in the silent language of their new, intertwined world. In that moment, watching his immense, powerful form consumed by the battle for their safety, Nora felt an unshakable certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be, protected and cherished, utterly his, within the impenetrable fortress of his will. The revelation of Chloe's betrayal and Gabriel's swift, ruthless response had ripped away the last veil from Nora's eyes. She now saw the world and her place within it with a terrifying clarity. The rival syndicate, no longer just a shadowy threat, became a tangible, malevolent force, and her connection to Gabriel was the very reason for their escalating aggression. They were fully aware that Gabriel knew about their schemes, and in a desperate, furious counterattack, they struck back. The once hushed executive floor now thrummed with a frenetic, controlled energy. Nora felt the shift in the very air. News filtered up, though never directly to her, of audacious attacks on Gabriel's sprawling empire. Logistics hubs, vital arteries of his global network, suffered mysterious sabotages that crippled operations for hours. Attempts to breach his financial networks were detected, sophisticated digital assaults thwarted by his unseen army of cybersecurity experts. Even physical incursions, small but violent, were reported at less protected facilities, quickly contained but leaving a trail of shattered glass and grim-faced security. They weren't trying to wound him financially, they were trying to draw him out, to create an opening, to get to her. She was the prize, the leverage they sought, and Gabriel was the formidable wall they were trying to tear down. Gabriel Russo became a general at war. Nora watched him, mesmerized and terrified, as he moved through his vast office, a whirlwind of controlled power. His calls were endless, his commands sharp and precise, directed to an army of unseen operatives across the globe. He was relentless, tireless, his focus absolute, his mind a steel trap anticipating every move, every counter-move. His face was set, grim, etched with an intensity that made him seem even larger, even more formidable than usual. He was a force of nature, protecting not just his empire, but her. He was fighting for her, and the sheer scale of his power, unleashed in her defense, was a terrifying, awe-inspiring thing. Nora, in this storm of war, found her role shifting. She became his silent, unwavering anchor. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath her skin, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of purpose. She anticipated his needs with an almost instinctive understanding. His office, usually a pristine bastion of order, became a war room, scattered with maps, data projections, and secure communication devices. Nora moved through it with quiet efficiency, ensuring every document was exactly where he needed it. Every screen displayed the correct information. She brought him his meals, unobtrusively placed on his desk, knowing he wouldn't ask, but would need the sustenance. She brewed his specific strong coffee, ensuring it was always hot and ready. Her quiet presence, her unwavering faith, became a small human respite in his storm of war. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't question his decisions, didn't argue. She simply obeyed, her every action a testament to her absolute trust. When he glanced at her, his eyes, though still sharp with the demands of battle, held a flicker of something that steadied her. He was fighting for her, protecting her, and in her complete submission to his will, she found an unexpected, profound sense of safety. One afternoon, the relentless pace seemed to reach a crescendo. Gabriel was hunched over multiple monitors, his eyes scanning complex data streams, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. He hadn't moved from his position for hours, his focus absolute. Nora watched him from her antechamber, sensing the immense burden he carried. Silently, she brewed a fresh pot of his preferred tea, a rich, dark blend he favored when pushing through the night. She poured it into his heavy ceramic mug, adding a slice of lemon exactly as he liked it. Then she walked to his desk, her steps soft, almost imperceptible. Without a word, she placed the steaming cup by his hand, careful not to disturb his intense concentration. His fingers, powerful and precise, grazed the mug, but his eyes remained fixed on the screens, a myriad of numbers and graphs scrolling endlessly. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her with words, But as his hand wrapped around the warm mug, Nora felt a profound, unspoken connection. It was a small, yet deeply significant gesture of comfort and support, offered and accepted in the silent language of their new, intertwined world. In that moment, watching his immense, powerful form consumed by the battle for their safety, Nora felt an unshakable certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be, protected and cherished, utterly his, within the impenetrable fortress of his will. The war room atmosphere, the constant threat, and her own unshakable trust in Gabriel had prepared Nora for many things, but not for the quiet, almost gentle way he finally explained the full truth of Mr. Thorne. It was late, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and silver below them. The only sounds, the soft hum of the building and the rustle of papers as Gabriel finally pushed away from his monitors. He gestured for her to sit, and for the first time in days, Nora felt her muscles relax. The tension that had held her rigid, slowly bleeding away. His voice was low, almost conversational, yet every word carried the weight of absolute authority and brutal honesty. "When you smiled at Thorne," Gabriel began, his gaze sweeping over her, "I understood what they were trying to do. He was a probe, Nora, a test, to see if you were accessible, to confirm your value as leverage." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "My reaction was immediate, not out of simple jealousy, though I admit that played its part. A flicker of something raw, possessive, crossed his formidable features. It was a message, a public declaration. She is mine. She is untouchable. Anyone who approaches her will be eliminated." Nora's breath hitched, every piece of the puzzle clicking into place with a sudden, devastating clarity. The fury she had witnessed, the instant, decisive firing, the shredded business card. It hadn't been an overreaction. It had been a calculated warning, a powerful, undeniable claim. He had been staking his territory, defining her as absolutely off-limits. "I miscalculated," Gabriel continued, his voice tight with a rare admission of error. "I believed the message would deter them, that they would retreat, understand the cost of touching what is mine." He clenched his jaw, his gaze hardening. "Instead, they saw it as confirmation. They saw my possessiveness, my immediate action, as proof of your immense value. It made you a prime target, not less." "Udu," the words resonated deep within Nora. Every extreme action, every possessive demand, every act of control that had once felt suffocating was now revealed as an overwhelming, absolute need to protect her from a world she couldn't comprehend, from enemies whose ruthlessness surpassed anything she could have imagined. His possessiveness was not just obsession, it was the ultimate form of care, a fierce, primal instinct to shield her from harm. He had been fighting for her life, long before she even knew the battle existed. She saw his control now not as a cage, but as an impenetrable shield, forged from his immense power and his unyielding will. A deep, irreversible surrender settled over Nora, a profound yielding that brought with it an unexpected peace. She knew her place. It was by his side, under his absolute formidable protection. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, seeing past the imposing CEO to the man who had laid bare his motives, his miscalculations, all for her. Her voice, though soft, was filled with an unshakable conviction, a quiet declaration of unwavering trust. "I understand," she whispered, the words a gentle caress in the quiet office. "I trust you, Gabriel." Before the echo of her words had even faded, the secure private line on Gabriel's desk suddenly chimed, a harsh, intrusive sound in the hushed space. He picked it up, his face instantly a mask of granite. Nora watched him, a shiver tracing its way down her spine, his eyes darkened, his jaw tightening with a cold fury she knew well. He didn't speak, but the chilling, distorted voice that crackled from the speaker was clear enough for Nora to hear. "Russo!" The voice snarled, laced with venomous triumph. "Your soft spot, Nora Vance. She's coming with us." The line went dead with a click, leaving behind a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. They were coming for her. The chilling, distorted voice from Gabriel's private line had been a declaration of war, a direct challenge to his absolute authority. Nora could still hear the venom in the words. "She's coming with us." The line had gone dead, leaving behind a silence that vibrated with a terrifying, undeniable promise of violence. From that moment, the entire building shifted. It wasn't just the executive floor. The tension seeped into every corner of Russo Global Logistics, a silent, pervasive hum that set everyone on edge. Nora felt it in the heightened alertness of her security detail, their eyes constantly sweeping, their movements sharper, more precise. She saw it in the faces of the few remaining executive staff, their expressions grim, their conversations hushed and clipped. The air itself felt charged, heavy with the unspoken certainty of an inevitable confrontation. Gabriel moved through it all with an almost primal alertness, his senses honed, his every muscle coiled, ready for impact. He was a predator preparing for battle, and Nora was the precious, vulnerable prize he intended to protect with his very life. Late that evening, as the last of the support staff had been discreetly escorted out, the executive floor became a vast, empty expanse. Only Nora, Gabriel, and a skeletal, highly trained security crew remained. The city lights outside glittered like scattered jewels, oblivious to the storm brewing within the glass tower. Gabriel stood by the panoramic windows, his back to Nora, his immense silhouette framed by the sprawling metropolis. He had been silent for a long time, his stillness more unnerving than any outburst. Then he turned, and for a rare, fleeting moment, the impenetrable mask of the formidable CEO seemed to waver. His eyes, usually sharp and unyielding, held a flicker of something profound, a deep weariness that Nora had never witnessed before. His voice, when he spoke, was low, almost a murmur so soft she had to strain to hear it. It was devoid of its usual command, carrying instead the immense burden of a man who held countless lives, and one in particular in his powerful hands. "The stakes, Nora," he said, his gaze sweeping over her, "are higher than you can imagine." He didn't elaborate, but the words hung heavy in the air, weighted with the unspoken horrors of his dangerous world. He wasn't just talking about his empire, he was talking about the personal cost, the sacrifices he had made, and the ones he was prepared to make to keep her safe. It was a glimpse into the immense, crushing responsibility he carried, a crack in his formidable armor that revealed the human beneath the legend. He wasn't just a possessive force, he was a man bearing an unbearable weight for her sake. Nora met his gaze, her own resolve hardening, reflecting the unwavering trust that had solidified within her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was eclipsed by a profound, unshakable certainty. She had seen the truth, understood the full, dangerous cost of his protection. She was no longer a terrified bystander, merely yielding to his will. This was her choice. Her heart, once fractured by doubt, now beat with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She walked towards him, her steps quiet but determined, closing the distance between them. Her voice was steady, infused with a quiet strength he hadn't heard before. "I understand," she affirmed, her gaze never leaving his. "I trust you, Gabriel. I'm not afraid. My place is with you." It wasn't just about his protection anymore, it was about him. She was actively choosing her place by his side, understanding the full, terrifying price of that decision. She was ready. Gabriel's eyes, which had held that flicker of vulnerability, now darkened with a renewed, fierce intensity. A muscle in his jaw flexed, a subtle tension that spoke of his immense power. He reached for her, his large hand closing around hers, his grip firm and possessive, a silent, absolute promise. Her smaller hand was completely enveloped in his, a fragile vessel held secure within an unyielding fortress. In that powerful clasp, Nora felt the weight of his absolute protection, a silent vow that he would face any danger, overcome any enemy to keep her safe. The vast, empty executive floor stretched around them, a beautiful, deadly arena. The city lights continued to sparkle outside, but within the glass tower, a profound, silent understanding passed between them. Nora, her hand clasped in his, felt an unshakable sense of belonging, an absolute peace in the eye of the impending storm. She was his, utterly and irrevocably, and in his fierce, unyielding embrace, she was ready for whatever came next. It was late. The city a glittering tapestry beyond the panoramic windows of Gabriel's executive floor. The usual hum of the building had quieted, replaced by a profound, almost anticipatory stillness. Only Nora, Gabriel, and a few members of his most elite security team remained, shadows against the dying light of the London evening. Nora was at her antechamber desk, finishing a final report, the quiet solace of Gabriel's presence in his office a familiar comfort. He was a sentinel, always there, always watching. Suddenly, without warning, the world plunged into darkness. The soft, ambient light of the executive floor vanished, replaced by an unsettling, absolute black. Nora gasped, her hand flying to her throat, a cold shock seizing her. For a heartbeat, there was only the suffocating void. Then the emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted the familiar luxury into something menacing. A harsh, piercing alarm blared, its shriek echoing through the suddenly vulnerable space, only to be brutally, abruptly silenced. The sudden quiet that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, oppressive silence. A cold dread seeped into her bones. This wasn't a power cut. This was deliberate. Her eyes, wide and searching in the flickering light, immediately sought Gabriel. He was already moving. He burst from his office, a dark, powerful blur against the emergency glow, his every muscle coiled, radiating a primal, dangerous energy. He didn't speak, didn't hesitate. In 2 swift strides, he was beside her. His large hand, firm and unyielding, closed around her arm, pulling her roughly, yet with an undeniable gentleness, from her chair. She stumbled, a small cry catching in her throat, but she didn't resist. His strength was absolute, his will undeniable, and she yielded to it completely, trusting him implicitly. He didn't stop until he had propelled her behind his immense, reinforced desk, its dark wood a formidable barrier against the unknown. He pushed her down, urging her to stay hidden, his body a vast, protective shield. His voice, a low, guttural command, was raspy with urgency. "Stay down. Don't move. Don't make a sound." His words were not a request, but an absolute order, and Nora, trembling, instinctively obeyed, pressing herself against the cold floor. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a small, sleek emergency communicator. "If I don't return in 5 minutes," he ordered, his eyes dark and intense in the dim light, fixing on hers, "press this. Don't hesitate." His gaze was unyielding, demanding her unwavering compliance. She nodded, mute with fear, her fingers closing around the cold metal device. Then he was gone. He melted into the shadows of the vast office, a formidable silhouette swallowed by the flickering light, a predator embarking on a deadly hunt. Nora pressed herself against the floor, her ears straining, every nerve ending screaming with terror. She heard it then, distant at first, from the lower floors, a muffled struggle, a sharp, sickening thud, then a single, precise gunshot, its crack echoing with chilling finality. The sounds grew closer, ascending through the building, a brutal symphony of combat. Grunts of effort, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor, the metallic scrape of unseen weapons. Nora imagined Gabriel, a dark, efficient force, moving with terrifying speed, eliminating the intruders one by one. His silence was the most terrifying thing of all. She heard no shouts from him, only the precise, brutal efficiency of his actions. He was a ghost in the darkened hallways, a deadly guardian protecting his domain. Her breath hitched, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was pinned behind the desk, her world reduced to the confined space, the flickering emergency lights casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The vast, empty office, once a symbol of power, was now a terrifying echo chamber for the sounds of a brutal battle unfolding just outside. She felt small, utterly helpless, yet a strange, fierce pride swelled within her. Gabriel was fighting for her. He was out there, a force of nature, protecting her with every fiber of his being, and her only role was to obey, to trust, to simply exist as the precious thing he was willing to die for. She clutched the communicator, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the doorway, waiting for his return, for the powerful, familiar presence that meant she was truly safe. The echoing silence that followed Gabriel's departure was a living thing, pressing in on Nora from all sides. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the cold floor behind the desk, each beat a painful thud in the terrifying quiet. The distant sounds of conflict had faded, replaced by an eerie stillness that left her suspended in a terrifying limbo. Every shadow cast by the flickering emergency lights seemed to writhe with unseen threats, every creak of the building a monster approaching. She clutched the communicator, her knuckles white, her gaze locked on the empty doorway, praying for his return. 5 minutes felt like an eternity, an unbearable stretch of agonizing uncertainty. Then a shadow detached itself from the gloom. Gabriel. He emerged from the darkness, a formidable, almost mythic figure. His expensive suit was disheveled, the pristine fabric now creased and torn in places, a testament to the brutal fight he had just waged. A dark, almost black smear, unmistakably blood, not his own, Nora instinctively knew, marred his sharp cheekbone, a stark contrast against his pale skin. His breathing was heavy, controlled, but the rise and fall of his broad chest beneath the torn suit jacket spoke of immense exertion. He had fought, and he had won. His eyes, dark and intense in the dim light, swept across the antechamber, assessing, confirming. When his gaze landed on Nora, still huddled behind the desk, a subtle easing of tension seemed to ripple through his powerful frame. He moved towards her, his steps purposeful, each one radiating a silent, unyielding power. The sheer size of him, the raw strength emanating from his battle-worn body, was overwhelming. He reached her, his large hand extending not to help her up, but to simply rest, firm and heavy, on her shoulder. The contact was electric, a sudden, searing warmth that chased away the cold dread that had gripped her. In that moment, pressed against the floor, feeling the undeniable presence of his immense strength, Nora felt an overwhelming rush of safety, a profound, dizzying sense of absolute protection. He was here. She was safe. Before she could even fully rise, the distinct thud of heavy boots announced the arrival of others. 2 more security personnel, their faces grim and alert, entered the antechamber, their weapons still in hand. They had clearly been fighting on other floors, their uniforms smudged, their breaths ragged. They surveyed the area, then turned to Nora, their expressions softening with relief. "Miss Vance," one of them said, his voice urgent but respectful, "we've secured a safe route. We need to get you to an off-site safe house immediately. It's too dangerous to remain here, far away from the immediate threat." He gestured towards the private elevator, his meaning clear. Far away from Gabriel. The words hung in the air, a stark choice laid bare before her. Go to a safe house, away from the danger, away from Gabriel. It was the logical, sensible option, the one her old self would have gratefully seized. But her old self was gone. irrevocably changed by the crucible of fear and the unyielding embrace of his protection. Nora looked at the security guard, then her gaze drifted to Gabriel. He stood beside her, silent, his hand still resting on her shoulder, his presence a formidable, unshakable anchor. He hadn't spoken, but his eyes, dark and unwavering, held hers, a silent question, a silent demand. She felt the weight of his gaze, the overwhelming power of his will, and knew, with an absolute certainty that resonated deep in her soul, what her answer must be. Without a moment's hesitation, without even a flicker of doubt, Nora made her choice. She pushed herself up from behind the desk, her legs still trembling, but her resolve unyielding. She didn't move towards the waiting security detail. Instead, she turned. Taking a single deliberate step directly towards Gabriel, she pressed herself into his side, her smaller frame fitting perfectly against his immense, unyielding form, a silent declaration of where she belonged. Her voice, though still trembling with the aftershocks of terror, was firm, infused with a fierce, unwavering devotion. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and clear, reflecting the flickering emergency lights. "I'm not going anywhere without him," she declared, her words a quiet defiance against the world's logic, a profound affirmation of her absolute trust. "I'm staying with Gabriel." A rare, almost imperceptible flicker of triumph, raw and fierce, crossed Gabriel's battle-worn face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual mask of dangerous control. But Nora had seen it. It was the look of a man whose deepest, most possessive claim had been unequivocally validated. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His arm, powerful and unyielding, clamped around her, pulling her tighter against his side, against the warmth of his body, the faint scent of blood and ozone clinging to his suit. She felt the raw strength in that embrace, the absolute ownership in his hold, and in it she found not fear, but salvation. His dark, slightly bloodied suit, once a symbol of violence, now became her chosen haven, the ultimate symbol of her unshakable protection. She was safe, utterly and irrevocably, within his formidable embrace. The chaos of the night had receded, leaving behind an eerie, almost sacred quiet. The syndicate, which had dared to breach Gabriel's fortress, was utterly dismantled. Nora didn't need to be told the details. She felt the profound stillness in the air, the return of Gabriel's absolute control. His ruthless efficiency had been terrifying to witness, a primal force unleashed in her defense, and it had eradicated the threat completely. He was an unstoppable force, a fearsome protector, and his reputation, Nora knew, would now echo even louder in London's shadowed circles. The immediate danger was gone, the adrenaline slowly bleeding out of her veins, leaving her weak but profoundly, irrevocably changed. Her life, once a quiet, independent stream, was now a powerful river, irrevocably intertwined with Gabriel's. There was no turning back, no going back to the girl who had worried about rent and smiled at strangers. That Nora was gone, forged anew in the crucible of fear and the unyielding embrace of his protection. She stood beside him at the panoramic windows, the first pale streaks of dawn, painting the London sky in hues of soft grey and rose. The city, which had been a battleground just hours before, now stretched out below them, serene and waking. Gabriel's arm remained clamped around her, a constant heavy weight that grounded her, solidifying her place. She leaned into him, her head resting against his broad shoulder, feeling the comforting rumble of his chest beneath her ear. Her vulnerability, once a source of constant anxiety, now felt safe, cherished within his overwhelming strength. She understood now, with a clarity that settled deep in her bones, that his possessiveness was no constraint, no cage, but a profound testament to his unwavering love and care. It was the fierce, absolute devotion of a man who would burn the world to keep her safe. She had chosen this, chosen him, and in that choice she found not a loss of self, but a profound sense of belonging. She was protected, absolutely, and that was a feeling more potent, more addictive than any freedom she had ever known. Gabriel shifted, his hand moving from her shoulder to cup the back of her head, gently tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His eyes, though still sharp with the aftermath of battle, held a deep, possessive tenderness that made her heart ache. He didn't need words to ask, but her eyes, wide and trusting, offered him everything. In his own terse, powerful way, he acknowledged her choice, her complete surrender. He pulled her closer, his voice a low rumble, deep and resonant, against her ear. "You are safe, Nora," he murmured, the words a warm breath against her skin. "Always. You are mine." The words weren't a question, but a declaration, an absolute claim that resonated through every fiber of her being. She closed her eyes, letting the power of his voice wash over her, feeling the truth of his promise settle deep within her. She was his, utterly and irrevocably, and in that ultimate submission, she found a peace she had never imagined. The sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing Gabriel's towering headquarters in a golden light. The glass and steel gleamed, no longer a symbol of cold power, but of a formidable, impenetrable sanctuary. Nora stood with Gabriel, gazing out at the waking city, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the unwavering strength of his arm around her. There was a profound sense of peace in her heart, a belonging that transcended fear. She was safe, by his side, cherished, and utterly his. Months later, the scars of that terrifying night had faded from the physical structure of Russo Global Logistics, but they remained etched into Nora's memory, a stark reminder of the world she now inhabited. The empire, however, had not only recovered but thrived, its formidable CEO more untouchable than ever. And Nora, the sweet receptionist, had been transformed. Her title was now Executive Liaison, a role that had blossomed from her once secret passion for interior design. Gabriel, with his characteristic thoroughness, had recognized her talent and given her a project that felt like a quiet rebellion within his steel and glass domain. She had designed a cozy, hidden break room for the staff, a small oasis of warmth and comfort tucked away on a lower floor, a splash of soft colors and natural wood in the otherwise stark corporate landscape. It was her creation, her touch of humanity, a testament to her unique place within his world. Gabriel Russo remained a ghost story in London's financial circles, his name whispered with a potent mix of awe and fear. His ruthlessness was legendary, his power absolute. The incident at the tower, though never publicly detailed, had only solidified his fearsome reputation. Everyone in the building, and indeed in the wider business world, knew the unspoken rule. Smiling at Gabriel's woman for too long, a lingering glance, an innocent pleasantry. It was a mistake that could end careers, a boundary that invited swift and terrifying retribution. Nora was not merely an employee, she was an extension of his power, a fiercely guarded treasure, and her safety was his unyielding decree. Yet, in the hushed intimacy of their private world, a different dynamic unfolded. Gabriel remained the dominant, powerful man she knew, his presence a constant, unyielding force. His possessiveness was as strong as ever, a deep current that ran beneath every interaction, every shared moment. He still dictated her schedule, oversaw her security, and made decisions that encompassed every aspect of her life. But Nora had learned to navigate his intensity, to understand the silent language of his absolute devotion. His commands were not shackles, but assurances. His stringent rules a profound testament to his unwavering protection. She found a deep contentment in this absolute devotion, a peace that surpassed any independence she had once craved. She was cherished, safe, and completely, utterly his. He was the only one who could coax genuine, unguarded smiles from her now, smiles that held a profound depth she hadn't possessed before. These were not the polite, professional smiles of the front desk receptionist, nor the innocent, fleeting connection she had shared with Mr. Thorne. These were smiles born of utter safety, of a deep, abiding love, and an absolute trust in her protector. One afternoon, Nora sat across from Gabriel in the staff break room she had designed. The space was bathed in the soft glow of hidden lighting, a stark contrast to the sharp edges of the building outside. She watched him, his formidable presence softened by the warm light, his eyes, still sharp and intense, fixed on her. She had just finished telling him about a new fabric she wanted to incorporate, her voice light, infused with the joy of creation. He didn't speak, but his large hand reached across the small, intimate table, covering hers. His grip was firm, possessive, yet gentle, a silent testament to their eternal bond. Nora's heart swelled with a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer just the girl who answered phones. She was his executive liaison, the designer of warmth within his empire, and the woman he protected with every fiber of his being. She looked at him, truly saw him, the formidable CEO and the fierce protector, and a genuine, radiant smile bloomed on her face, a smile that was solely, completely for him. She was cherished, safe, and happily under his unwavering protection, completely and utterly his, forever bound by the unyielding power of his desire and the depth of her yielding heart. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.